In 1979, two psychologists at Hebrew University conducted a series of experiments that would eventually earn one of them a Nobel Prize in economics, and permanently dismantle the assumption that human beings make rational financial decisions. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky discovered something precise and reproducible. The pain of losing $100 registers in the human brain with roughly twice the intensity of the pleasure of gaining the same amount. That asymmetry is not rhetorical. It is measurable. It has been replicated across cultures, income levels, and educational backgrounds for more than 4 decades. And if you have ever held a losing investment longer than the data warranted, avoided an opportunity because of what you might lose rather than what you might gain, or watched your financial decisions consistently fall short of your stated intentions, this neurological asymmetry is almost certainly a primary cause. Your brain was not built for wealth accumulation. It was built for loss prevention. For most of the decisions that actually matter, those two objectives are in direct conflict. This channel examines the intersection of neuroscience and financial decision-making, not through motivation or theory divorced from evidence, but through named researchers, primary studies, and documented outcomes. Loss aversion is one of the most consistently replicated findings in behavioral science. It has been observed in laboratory experiments, in real market data, in field studies involving professional fund managers, and in surveys of ordinary investors across multiple continents. In this video, we will cover 4 areas. First, the neurological mechanism, which brain structures drive loss aversion, why they evolved, and what functional MRI research reveals about how the brain processes financial threat. Second, the original research, Kahneman and Tversky's prospect theory, the specific experimental designs that produced it, and what subsequent meta-analyses have confirmed or refined. Third, the behavioral manifestations, for specific, named patterns documented in the financial literature, each with a measurable cost to long-term returns and each directly traceable to the loss aversion mechanism. And fourth, a practical framework, not motivational advice to think more positively, but structural interventions with empirical support that constrain the bias without requiring you to alter your underlying neurology. One clarification before we proceed: this is not an argument for taking more risk. The research does not support that as a general prescription. What it supports is something more precise, adjusting the architecture of your decision-making process so that a neurological system calibrated for a different era has fewer opportunities to interfere with your financial judgment. To understand loss aversion, you need a working model of the brain structures involved, because the behavior is not a product of poor reasoning. It is a product of architecture. The human brain is not a unified decision-making organ. It is a layered structure. Newer regions, most importantly the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, abstract reasoning, and long-term evaluation, sit atop older structures that evolved hundreds of thousands of years before financial instruments existed. When you encounter a potential financial loss, the structure that activates is the amygdala, a paired, almond-shaped cluster of neurons located in the medial temporal lobe. The amygdala is the brain's primary threat detection system. It evolved to identify and respond to danger, predators, physical harm, resource scarcity, and it processes the possibility of financial loss through the same threat response circuitry. A landmark study published in 2005 by Camelia Cunnan and Brian Knudsen at Stanford University used functional MRI imaging to observe subjects making financial decisions in real time. The results were unambiguous. The anticipation of a financial loss activated the anterior insula, a region associated with physical pain, disgust, and visceral discomfort, before any actual loss had occurred. The brain was classifying a potential financial outcome as a physical threat. By contrast, the anticipation of financial gain activated the nucleus accumbens, the brain's primary reward circuit. The key finding was not that both regions activated. It was the difference in activation intensity. The threat response, mediated by the insula and amygdala, was measurably stronger than the reward response for equivalent monetary outcomes. This is precisely what Kahneman and Tversky had quantified behaviorally. The imaging studies confirmed the mechanism beneath the behavior. What this means in practice is significant. When you consider selling an investment at a loss, you are not making a purely cognitive calculation. You are triggering a neurological response that classifies that action as a physical threat. The feeling of resistance, the reluctance to realize the loss, is not irrational in the technical sense. It is the output of a system that served human survival effectively for most of our evolutionary history. The problem is that the environment has changed entirely. A declining equity position is not the same threat as a depleted food source. Your amygdala has not received that update. The formal theoretical framework for loss aversion is prospect theory, published by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in the journal Econometrica in 1979. It remains one of the most cited papers in the history of economics and social science. The central contribution is the value function, a mathematical description of how people experience outcomes relative to a reference point, rather than in absolute terms. The function has two properties directly relevant here. First, it is asymmetric, losses are weighted more heavily than equivalent gains. Second, it exhibits diminishing sensitivity in both directions. The subjective difference between losing $10 and $20 feels larger than the difference between losing 90 and 100, and the same diminishing returns apply to gains. Kahneman and Tversky estimated the loss aversion coefficient at approximately 2.25, meaning a potential gain must be roughly 2¼ times larger than a potential loss for the two to register as equivalent in subjective value. Subsequent research has refined that estimate. A 2013 meta-analysis by Simon Gachter, Eric Johnson, and Andreas Hermann, examining 16 separate studies, found a median loss aversion coefficient of 1.97. The range across studies runs from approximately 1.4 to 4.8. Nearly every estimate in the literature falls above 1.5. The finding is consistent regardless of whether subjects are students, experienced investors, or professional traders. In 2002, Daniel Kahneman received the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences for this body of work. The prize committee cited prospect theory's contribution to our understanding of actual human decision-making under uncertainty, as opposed to the idealized rational agent models that had dominated economic theory. Amos Tversky died in 1996 and was ineligible for the prize. Kahneman has written since that the intellectual contribution was indistinguishably shared. If you find this kind of evidence-based analysis useful, subscribing ensures you receive the next installment. One video per week, always grounded in primary research, never in opinion. The research has identified 4 specific, named behavioral patterns through which loss aversion consistently degrades financial outcomes. Knowing them by name matters, because the first step to recognizing when loss aversion is operating is knowing what it looks like in practice. The first is the disposition effect. Hirsch, Sheffrin and Mayer-Statman described it in 1985 in the Journal of Finance. Investors systematically hold losing positions too long and sell winning positions too early. The mechanism is direct. Selling a position at a loss means realizing that loss, activating the full threat response. Holding the position defers that activation. The disposition effect has been documented in stock market data in the United States, Finland, Israel, and China, and in the individual trading records of tens of thousands of investors. It reliably produces worse risk-adjusted returns than a strategy without the bias. The second pattern is status quo bias. William Samuelson and Richard Zeckhauser at Harvard documented in 1988 that people systematically prefer existing arrangements over alternatives that are objectively superior. Any change introduces the possibility of loss, and inaction forecloses that possibility. In financial terms, this produces portfolios that are never rebalanced, insurance policies that are never re-evaluated, and fee structures that are never renegotiated, even when the cost of inaction is clearly higher than the cost of change. The third is myopic loss aversion, described by Shlomo Benartzi and Richard Thaler in 1995. Investors who evaluate their portfolios more frequently encounter more frequent instances of perceived loss, even when long-term performance is positive. The practical implication is counterintuitive. Investors who check their portfolios daily tend to make worse allocation decisions than investors who review quarterly, not because of knowledge differences, but because of exposure to loss-triggering events. The fourth is opportunity cost neglect. The neurological pain of losing money you currently hold is far more vivid than the less tangible discomfort of failing to acquire money you never possessed. As a result, inaction consistently feels safer than it is. Missing a rising market does not register in the brain with the same force as entering a falling one, even when the financial consequence is identical. The mechanism is established. The evidence is clear. What follows is where most standard guidance on loss aversion makes a critical error in reasoning, and where the research points toward a fundamentally different kind of solution. This next section contains the practical implication that most treatments of this topic miss entirely. The most common prescription for loss aversion is familiar: be aware of your bias, think long-term, accept that losses are temporary, and do not let fear drive your decisions. This advice is not incorrect in substance. It is incorrect in mechanism, and in applied neuroscience, the mechanism determines whether an intervention produces results. Advising someone whose amygdala is classifying a market decline as a physical threat to simply reason past that response is equivalent to advising someone with a conditioned startle reflex to stop flinching. The instruction is accurate. The intervention is insufficient. The research on cognitive bias is explicit on this point. In Thinking, Fast and Slow, published in 2011, Kahneman writes directly that after decades of studying cognitive errors, he continues to make them. He does not present this as a personal failure. He presents it as a feature of the system. Awareness of a bias reduces its influence marginally and inconsistently. It does not eliminate it. The financial industry's standard advice: diversify broadly, automate your contributions, avoid checking your portfolio during a downturn, stay the course, is actually a collection of structural interventions, not cognitive prescriptions. The reason this advice works, when it works, is not that investors who follow it become more rational. It is that the structure reduces the number of decision points at which loss aversion can operate. Fewer active decisions means fewer moments at which the amygdala can override the prefrontal cortex. The architecture is the intervention. Understanding this distinction has direct implications for how you design your own financial process, which is what the research suggests is actually tractable. What follows is a set of structural interventions drawn from the behavioral economics and decision science literature, each with documented empirical support, each designed to reduce the number of moments in which loss aversion can interfere with financial decision-making. The first is pre-commitment. Richard Thaler and Shlomo Benartzi's Save More Tomorrow program, published in the Journal of Political Economy in 2004, demonstrated that employees who committed in advance to directing future salary increases into retirement savings achieved savings rates dramatically higher than those who received identical advice and made the decision at the point of receiving the raise. The operative mechanism: the employee never took possession of the additional income. Because the money was never held, it was never perceived as a loss when directed to savings. The practical application for any investment context: automate contributions so that the act of investing is never presented to your brain as a choice between possessing money and risking it. Remove the decision point entirely. The second is reference point management. Kahneman and Tversky established that loss aversion is always measured against a reference point, and that reference points are not fixed. They are chosen, often by default. Most investors measure performance against entry price, which maximizes the emotional salience of every decline. Tracking performance against an inflation-adjusted multi-year benchmark changes the reference point in ways that reduce reactivity, without changing the portfolio or requiring any change in thinking. The third is evaluation frequency reduction. Benartzi and Thaler's myopic loss aversion research showed that subjects who reviewed investment returns annually allocated significantly more to equities than those shown the same data monthly, despite identical underlying performance. The simplest structural change many investors can implement immediately is deliberately reducing how often they observe portfolio valuations. Not from ignorance, but by design. The fourth is pre-specified exit criteria. Research by decision scientist Gary Klein on prospective analysis, imagining failure scenarios before committing to a course of action, suggests that articulating in advance the conditions under which you will exit a position substantially reduces the emotional weight of those conditions when they materialize. In practice, Write down the specific circumstances under which you will sell a position before you buy it. When those circumstances arrive, you are executing a prior decision made when you were calm, not generating a new decision under the full influence of loss aversion at its peak. What these 4 interventions have in common is this: they reduce the frequency and intensity of moments in which the amygdala is asked to participate in financial decision-making. They do not make you more rational. They reduce the circumstances under which rationality must compete with a threat detection system that evolved for a different world. Loss aversion is not a character flaw. It is not a failure of discipline or intelligence. It is a structural feature of the human brain, one that served survival effectively for 100,000 years and is now, in the context of financial decision-making, systematically counterproductive. Kahneman and Tversky did not discover that people are irrational. They discovered that people are rational according to a different set of parameters than classical economics assumed, parameters shaped by survival pressure, not by the requirements of portfolio management. The research literature is consistent on one conclusion: the goal is not to eliminate loss aversion. It cannot be eliminated. The goal is to design the conditions under which you make financial decisions so that a neurological bias has fewer opportunities to operate at the wrong moment. If this type of analysis is useful to you, subscribe. This channel publishes 1 video per week at this standard: primary research, named studies, named researchers, no simplifications that compromise accuracy. The next video examines the Dunning-Kruger effect in investment decision-making, specifically, the research demonstrating why investors with the highest self-reported confidence in their analytical ability are statistically the most likely to underperform a passive index.